The night was heavy with the low hum of motorcycles parked along the cracked asphalt outside Rusty Jack's Roadhouse, the kind of biker bar that reeked of sweat, smoke, gasoline, and the kind of untold stories men carried in their scars, and though the neon beer signs flickered weakly in the windows, the life inside was anything but dim, with laughter roaring, mugs slamming, boots stomping against the wood-planked floor, and the air thick with the sound of guitars on the jukebox screaming defiance into the night. Yet when the heavy oak door swung open and the silhouette of a woman stepped in, every head turned without needing to be told, because Veronica Steele was not the kind of woman you could miss, not the kind of woman you could pretend was just another leather-clad biker rolling in from the highway. No, she was the Iron Queen, the billionaire heiress who had turned her late father's struggling custom bike shop into a global empire, the woman who had outbought, outbuilt, and outridden men twice her age and 3 times her arrogance, the woman whose face had graced magazines, whose words were quoted in business circles, but whose soul still belonged to the road, to the nights where engines drowned out the silence of loneliness, and when she walked into a place like this she brought with her the storm, her boots echoing like gunshots as she crossed the threshold, her black leather jacket hugging her athletic frame, her crimson silk bandana spilling beneath waves of dark hair, her rings glinting beneath the bar's yellowed lights like tiny sparks of danger, and though she could buy the entire place 10 times over, tonight she wasn't here as a billionaire, she was here as a biker, restless and reckless, hungry for something she couldn't name, and so she let her gaze sweep across the room like a predator surveying prey, her lips curving at the sight of men too eager, puffing up their chests in hope of catching her eye, but her gaze slid past them with disdain. Past the drunk college boys who didn't belong, past the aging bikers nursing their whiskeys, past the women who clung to their men like fading shadows, until her eyes landed on someone different, someone who didn't belong and yet belonged more than anyone in the room, a man sitting at the far end of the bar with a posture that spoke of discipline and fatigue, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his head bowed slightly over a glass of cheap beer, his hair cut close to his scalp in a style that time had turned gray at the edges, his plaid shirt faded and patched, his jeans torn not from fashion but from work, his hands large, scarred, and steady even as he held the drink loosely, and there was a stillness about him, a quiet gravity that contrasted the chaos around him, as though the noise of the bar dared not touch him, and Veronica felt the spark of curiosity ignite inside her, for she was used to reading men in seconds, dismissing them in half that, but this one, this quiet stranger with his aura of solitude, was unreadable, and Veronica Steele had never been able to resist a mystery, so she walked, her boots clicking against the wood, conversations faltering as men turned to watch the billionaire biker queen cross the floor like she owned it, though she didn't even glance at them, her eyes locked on the man at the bar, who did not look up until she slid onto the stool beside him, her smirk daring him to acknowledge her, but he didn't, not at first, just lifted the glass and took a long swallow before setting it down with the kind of controlled precision that told her immediately this was no ordinary drifter, and when he finally turned his face toward her she was struck not by his looks, though he was ruggedly handsome in a weathered, world-beaten way, but by his eyes. Eyes that carried storms and deserts, blood and silence, eyes that had seen things no bar in this small town could ever imagine, and she leaned closer, her perfume a mix of gasoline, leather, and danger, and teased with a low voice, "You're not from around here, are you?" But instead of flirting back, instead of boasting or scrambling to impress her like most men did, he simply shrugged, his voice low, steady, tired but not weak as he replied, "I don't belong anywhere these days," and those 6 words told her more than hours of conversation ever could, for she recognized the weight of displacement, of carrying burdens too heavy to set down, and it only intrigued her more, so she tapped her finger against the sleeve of his plaid shirt, noticing how thick his forearms were, the kind of strength that wasn't sculpted in gyms but forged in battlefields or steel yards, and she caught the faint glimpse of ink just beneath the fabric, the edge of something old and bold pressed into his skin, and without thinking, because Veronica never asked permission when her curiosity burned, she reached for his collar, gripping the fabric tight before anyone around them had time to react, and with a swift tug she ripped the shirt downward, the sound of tearing cotton cutting through the jukebox song, through the laughter, through the noise, until silence swallowed the bar whole, because etched across his chest, framed by the strong lines of his shoulders, was the unmistakable tattoo of the United States Marine Corps, the eagle, globe, and anchor. Sharp and proud, the ink faded with years but still carrying the authority of sacrifice, the kind of tattoo that was not chosen lightly, not worn for style, but earned in sweat, blood, and loyalty that did not break even when bones did, and in that frozen second the bar that had been alive with chaos went utterly still, as if the entire room inhaled at once and forgot to exhale, whispers breaking the silence like cracks in glass. Marine Corps, combat vet, he's one of them. And even the roughest bikers, men with prison ink and war stories of their own, shifted uneasily, their bravado dimming beneath the shadow of that emblem, for every man knew what it meant, knew the kind of fire someone had to walk through to carry that mark, and Veronica herself, bold as she was, felt her smirk falter as she realized she had not just peeled back a stranger's shirt but had uncovered the weight of a life lived in battles she could only imagine, and yet she did not flinch or apologize, instead letting the corner of her mouth curl into something softer, more respectful, and she whispered two words that only someone who knew would ever dare say, Semper Fi, the motto of the Corps, the binding promise of always faithful, and for the first time that night the man, Jack, as she would later learn, lifted his brow and looked at her not as another face in the crowd but as someone who had surprised him, because those words were not spoken lightly, and in his gaze she saw the flicker of recognition, of curiosity mirrored back at her, and though the rest of the bar sat frozen, caught between awe and intimidation, the billionaire biker queen and the single dad veteran had already begun a conversation that needed no words, a recognition of two storms colliding, two worlds no one else could understand, and from that moment the night was no longer just another night, it was the beginning of a story no one in Rusty Jack's roadhouse would ever forget, a story of respect, of redemption, of love forged in scars, and of vengeance that would eventually leave the world trembling.